Hey, Slater Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world. Glad you're here. I want to kick off the show. Well, coming up, we're going to talk with a legal expert about changing the charges against the cop in Minneapolis from a 3rd degree to a 2nd degree and what that means. Remember we did a segment about a week ago saying I'm a little concerned that he's going to get off and he's going to walk and what the heck is going to happen then. We're going to have a second wave of protests, to say the least. That was the 3rd degree. It may even be higher likelihood that he gets off with a 2nd degree. So we'll give that insight all coming up in about 20 minutes or so. But I want to start off talking about crowds. Crowds, and I want to talk about personal responsibility as well, big picture. This is Claire Lehman, who I like very much, from Quillette. She said, the psychology of crowds is a fascinating thing. Because most people are conformists, it seems pretty clear that once a certain number of ideologues take hold in an organization or society, a tipping point is reached. And the herd just follows along. If you've ever wondered, how could that have happened? When reading about a period of history where people got hurt and bystanders just blindly went along with it, pay attention, because it's happening right now. Only a very small number of people are truly evil, but a very large number of people are conformists. So to prevent evil on a mass scale, it's more important for us to ward against our own instinct to conform with the crowd than it is to worry about anything else. So crowd psychology, it's really interesting because we don't get it yet. We still don't understand it. I've believed, for as long as I've been thinking about it, one thing, and I think I'm wrong. There's some nuance here that I'd never really thought about that I wanted to sort of talk out loud about and see if we can come to some kind of conclusion. But what I've thought for a long time is that when people are in a crowd, you lose your mind. You just completely lose your mind. It's like an emotional virus, like emotional contagion. And you do things you would never thought you would do because you're in the crowd now, right? So like you would never throw a rock in a window, right? But if you're in a big mob and everyone's throwing rocks in windows, then you might throw a rock in a window. So that's sort of the popular thought right now from criminologists and psychologists, is this crowd theory of madness. So let's talk about where that came from. It came from this guy, Gustave Le Bon. He was one of the first guys in a sort of our modern time. Look at that beard. One of the first guys in modern times to sort of talk about how free will evaporates and madness takes over. We can't control ourselves when we're in a crowd like that. So a quick backstory on him. He grew up in a small town in France, and he wanted to be a member of the Parisian elite. But he worked on an ambulance at the time, so the elite would have nothing of him. He thought that mass revolutionary movements were caused by madness. And he thought that if he could prove that, then he could figure out a way for the elites to use it to their advantage, and that would be his ticket to being accepted by the elites. Does that make sense? So it's like, I want to prove that people become mad when they're in a crowd, and then I can give like this rule, this guidebook to the elites on how they can manipulate people for their own ends, and then I'll be accepted. That was his motivation. So what did he do? He measured the size of skulls. Okay, now we haven't done this segment yet on the TV. We've had so much to do. I think we could probably do it tomorrow. We'll either do it tomorrow or Thursday. I promise you. We will do the Sam Morton story about where race came from. Race is a social construct. Okay, it's a completely made up thing from Sam Morton in the 1800s, where he measured the size of skulls and determined that white people's skulls were bigger than black people's skulls. Therefore, their brains were bigger, and therefore they were smarter and superior. It's the stupidest thing you've ever heard, but that when you talk about race, when people talk about race, you're going along with that premise, that the size of a skull relates, right? It's so stupid. So we'll do that segment in full tomorrow or the next day. But this guy did the same thing, right? He took the skulls, not of different races, but of different classes of people. So he took some skulls of regular people, and then he took some skulls of business people, and then he took some skulls of the elites, of the aristocrats, and filled them with mustard seed and measured the amount of mustard seed and determined that aristocrats and businessmen have bigger brains and therefore don't succumb to the mass hysteria that other people succumb to, right? Oh, this was 1879. I should have noted that. It was 1879. Like the stupidest thing ever. He also confirmed that black people have smaller brains, and of course, women. naturally. Now I'm going to leave Jesse Kelly for the jokes there, but we'll roll it. So he published his paper, thinking this would be his ticket to the elites, and he was just crushed. The elites hated it for whatever reason, and he didn't get that notoriety that he wanted. So in shame, he moved to Saudi Arabia and wrote books on the inferiority of the people over there, the Arabians, and criminals. And this is when he wrote his book called The Crowd. This is where he came up with this whole concept. He said, in a crowd, he, the person, the individual, is a barbarian. In a crowd, every sentiment and act is contagious. We are impulsive, irrational, irritable. He goes on and says, a good orator who knows his tricks can hypnotize a crowd and whip up a crowd for his own ends. He says a crowd is only impressed by excessive sentiments, so exaggerate, resort to repetition, and don't prove anything by reason. A couple days ago on the radio show, we were talking about Tom Cotton and the New York Times, and the New York Times is like, oh, we're so horrible that we quoted this, or we printed this article from Tom Cotton. And we went through all the people that the New York Times has printed op-eds from: Maduro, Hamas, the Taliban, Putin, and all those. They also published in 1941. They did an excerpt from Mein Kampf, and the top it was like Tools for Propaganda by Adolf Hitler. Right? So we actually quoted from Mein Kampf, which was the first time we did that. But anyway, we quoted this whole section about propaganda, and that's what Hitler said about propaganda. Right? Never appeal to reason. Just say the same things over and over again. The bigger the lie, the better. And this is what Le Bon was saying as well. And it wasn't just Hitler who picked up on this. So Mussolini said, I have read all the works of Gustave Le Bon, and I don't know how many times I've reread The Crowd. It's a capital work to which to this day I frequently refer. Goebbels is actually Goebbels' assistant, but Goebbels said, no one since the Frenchman Le Bon has understood the mind of the masses as well as he. Okay, so that's where that came from. I tend to agree with that, right? That people lose themselves in crowds and they become helpless, right? The madness takes over. I always used to think that, and I still kind of do, but I'm not so sure anymore. I don't know if that is true. You've seen a lot of rioting on TV. Did you join them? You're like, oh, like the madness took over. I must go throw rocks in windows. Of course not. If you were there, do you think you would have joined them too? I don't know, like the riot police. They didn't join the rioters. Right? There were no police there who were like, I can't take it anymore. Come on, everybody, let's join, let's light it on fire. They never did that. So how much madness can a crowd really cause? I don't know. So what's the nuance, right? So maybe it's something like crowds can be intoxicating, but only if you want them to. Only if you're looking for an excuse to give up your responsibility. Crowds can be intoxicating only if you let them. And I think that kind of goes back to Claire's point, right? She said, to prevent evil on a mass scale is more important for us to ward against our own instinct to conform with the crowd than it is to worry about anything else. So if you don't want to conform, then I think, I don't know if you won't then, right? So like, think of it like a dance club, right? Like a Vegas club or something. That can be intoxicating, right? If you want it to, right? To me, like that's the most repulsive thing. Like I'm just repulsed by like a Vegas dance club. That sounds like the worst place on the planet. I get a headache just thinking about it. So no matter how loud the music is or how stroby the strobe lights are, I will never be intoxicated by a Vegas dance club. But if you want to, then you will, right? So I don't know if it is the madness of crowds that's helplessly taking people over, making people lose their minds. I think there's more responsibility to it than that. I feel like that's just an excuse. It's a way to pass off accountability. Well, I didn't do it. It was the crowd. It was the crowd that did it. It's like pleading insanity, right? Well, I didn't do it. It was temporary insanity. Like, no, I don't know if we should let people get away with that. Theodore Dalrymple, he's one of my favorite writers. This guy's fantastic. Life at the Bottom. Life at the Bottom? I think that's it. Life at the Bottom is an amazing book. He's got a bunch of them. He's a prison psychologist. He's a psychologist at the poorest hospitals in England. So he has an incredible perspective. He's a brilliant and amazing writer. So he tells a story where he's talking to a prisoner. And he asks the guy in prison, he's like, what are you in for? And the guy says, just normal burglaries. All right, so there's a couple of things here. Like, to me, that sentence, just normal burglaries, to me, the word burglary stands out, right? He's in there for burglaries. But to Theodore Dalrymple, he thinks, wait, normal? Normal for whom? What do you mean normal? Like the burglaries were just like gray skies in an English winter, just an unavoidable and to be expected thing. Like, there's normal burglary. But then also the word just. Like, it's no big deal to break into someone's home and steal things. It's just a thing, just a normal burglary. So in the book, or in this section, he breaks down the history of blaming crime and responsibility to it or whatever. And he writes, the moral of the story is that those who go to court and to prison are victims of chance at best and of prejudice at worst. And I think we see a lot of that now, right? Oh, people are in jail because of prejudice. Or chance or prejudice. Such an attitude, of course, prevents them from reflecting upon their own contribution to their predicament. For chance and prejudice are not forces over which an individual has much personal control. File all this under lack of individual responsibility, which is a direction our country has been moving for a very long time, right? And now we're there and still headed in warp speed, right? So the president, the vaccine thing's called Operation Warp Speed. This is more warp speed. Warp speed towards even less and less personal responsibility. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. So, the most ridiculous thing has been talked about the last few days. I just want to take a minute to discuss it, and that is abolishing the police, right? Or even defund. Laughable concept, but I'll bite, right? I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. The people who are saying this stuff, they don't deserve the benefit of the doubt with this, but we'll give it a serious discussion. And here's why, really, to be fair. So Trump, and during the campaign especially, we talked a lot about Trump and how he sets the anchor. So Trump will say something seemingly outrageous, he sets the anchor way over here, and then walks it back and still gets what he wants, right? It's like an old business technique, and we would always hold that up as a virtue of Trump, right? So he says something like, build the wall and have Mexico pay for it, right? And then it's like, oh, okay, we want have Mexico pay for it, but we're still gonna build the wall, right? So example. So if we praise Trump for doing that, maybe that's what these abolish the police people are saying. Now, some of them genuinely want to abolish the police. So that's why I said I'm giving them credit that they don't necessarily deserve, but I think a lot of people are like, well, hey, maybe we can actually do some genuine rethinking of the police departments, and that's fine. So those are the people and concerns that I'm going to address right now. First thing to know here, it is really hard to pin down the numbers. Just like it was with COVID. Like, that's one of my big lessons from whole COVID stuff, is it's so hard to know anything. It really is. It's hard to pin down numbers. We can't even get a number, pin down the number of deaths from COVID, let alone number of cases, right? It's like, geez, guys, why is that difficult? Was it the other day, did we show the chart? I think we did, of number of homicides. And we couldn't even pin that down. There's like wildly different numbers. The FBI has numbers, the Washington Post has numbers, there's 2 other organizations, and they all have different numbers of the number of homicides. It's like, oh, can't you can't we know that? Like, to a pretty, small number, right? No, we can't. We can't even know that. So it's really hard to get numbers for anything. And I read the other day, someone said, oh, the police budget we got to defund it because the police budget in most cities is more than half the total budget. And I saw that and I was like, oh, well, that can't be right. And it turns out it's not. So in San Diego, where I live, it's about 1/3 of the budget. And that's about average. Do we have this chart here? So this is from some, if you look on the way bottom left there, let me pull it up here actually, sorry. It's, I think this is from like some lefty group. The Center for Popular Democracy, that sounds lefty. Law for Black Lives and Black Youth Project 100. So the numbers on the right, like that's percentage of general fund expenditure. So, you know, it's like 20, 30% or something like that. New York City's pretty crazy. Even though it's $4 billion budget, it's only 8% of the entire general fund budget. But, you know, most cities are about 20, 30, maybe you get into the 40%. So it's not most cities over half, right? That's not true. But even this number, like how true is this? I don't even know. Because like, does this total police spending, does that include pensions? Does that include unfunded pension liabilities? Does general fund expenditures, does that include pensions and debt expenditures? So it depends how you even categorize any of these things. So it's very tricky to pin down the numbers. But anyway, I can tell you in San Diego, they actually yesterday voted to increase the budget of the police department by $27 million. We're spending about $500 million right now, and they increased it by $27 million in spite of all the pressure, which is pretty amazing that they did that. But I read some quote from she was the head of like the local climate change action group or something. It's like, why are you commenting on this? But the local paper quoted her, and she said, "This budget does not reflect the values of San Diegans, and its enactment would have racist outcomes." Like funding the police department, racist outcomes. Okay, anyway, that's neither here nor there. So there's a big point. It's hard to even pin down these numbers at all, but alas, we'll proceed. So a lot of these groups, they say they want the money diverted. They say they want it reinvested in the community. Give me a break, guys. $22 trillion over the last 50 years of poverty programs, and it's only made things worse. And most of this money doesn't ever go to poor people, right? It goes to the people who serve poor people. So it's really used just to create a whole new class of bureaucrats. One of our local city council members, I'm just using San Diego as an example, but it's everywhere across the entire country. But one of our local city council members said that she's proposing an office on race and equity. Okay, so there's this movement to take the $27 million increase in San Diego that we were going to spend, and we did end up spending on the police. And instead of spending on the police, we put it and create an office on race and equity. So what have you done? You just created a whole new bureaucracy. Good for you. So now you got 100 new city employees. You have their pensions that you're going to pay out for the rest of their lives. And very little of that money, if any, is going to be spent on anything that's going to make any difference whatsoever to actual people. So it's what a waste. Reinvest. And if you're going to let people keep more of their money, right? This is everyone. Lower income, let them keep more of their money. That'd be way better. But that's not good enough for the progressives, clearly, because you got to take money from some people and then give it to others. That's so they can pat themselves on the back. And by the way, it would also be easier for people in lower income neighborhoods to earn money if rioters weren't burning their businesses to the ground. I read an article just this morning of a business in Minneapolis. They make the plastic rollers that are used on machines that make checks. Crazy, right? It's called like 7 something. Forget the name of the company. Anyway, 50 jobs. And the owners are like, oh, we're out of here. I've never dreamed of leaving Minneapolis. Never dreamed it in a million years. He says, we're gone. Because the government, they don't care about my business. They don't protect our people. We were all on our own during all this, and he says they're out of here. Been downtown since 1987. So far, just in Minneapolis, 1,000 commercial properties were damaged, 52 businesses completely destroyed, 30 with severe damage. $500 million in damages, even adjusting for inflation. That's the second highest cost of a riot since the 92 LA riots. So 92 LA is still number 1, and this is number 2, what happened in Minneapolis. Right, so it's, like, how about instead of reinvesting, how about you just don't burn the place to the ground? That's a good start. But reinvesting, it maybe even sounds nice, but it's a huge waste of money that's not going to go to help anyone. One of the proposals people always throw out there is, let's take the money for police departments and put it in affordable housing. You know, in California, it costs up to $800,000 a unit to build an affordable housing apartment. In San Diego, it's $800,000 a unit. So if you took that $27 million for the increase in the police budget and instead built an affordable housing unit at $800 a pop, you could build 33 units. 33 units, that's it. Right, so what are we talking about? Reinvest in the community, give me a break. Second point, cops are in a tough spot. Cops are in a really tough spot. The things that we've always had in a civilization to keep people in line, you have God first, then you have the community, and I'll put community and culture as one, right? Because the community sets a culture. in this case. And then the third thing is you had a family. Right? These are the different influences and forces in a person's life that keep you acting right. And when all three of those things are removed, which they have been, right? God, obviously. And then culture, just like when kids pump a culture of music, of TVs and movies, and you name it, into their heads and hearts all day long, right? Of violence and all the rest. And then family, right? When there's no dads around to teach what is right and whip kids into shape, and single moms are doing the best they can. When you remove all three of those fail-safes, who's left? The police. They're the only ones left. And they only have one tool in their tool belt. They only have force. That's all they can really do. Same with teachers, similar idea, right? Teachers were meant to teach, and now they're glorified babysitters, constantly disciplining kids, telling them to put their phones away and all this stuff. And because of restorative justice, there's nothing teachers, which is like the equivalent of abolishing the police for K through 12. Teachers can't even discipline properly. It's bad enough that teachers had to discipline, but now they can't even. So it's hopeless. In so many classrooms across the country, almost all the classrooms across, it's totally hopeless. The disrespect is rampant. Teachers, they're not supposed to teach kids how to act. That's God, community, and family. And teachers just supplement that. So we've just burdened teachers with way too much responsibility, and then they fail, because of course they will, and then we blame teachers. And parents don't take any responsibility, sort of like what we talked about in the last segment. So it's the same thing here with the police, right? Everything, well, hold on, let me back it up. I was gonna say everything else fails. That's not right. The three fail-safes, they didn't fail. They've been removed. They've been systematically removed. They didn't fail. But if you remove them, right, so if they were still there, they'll work 100% of the time. But when they're removed, we just leave it all up to the police. This is the former Dallas police chief. He said, every societal failure, we put it on the cops to solve. Not enough mental health funding, let the cop handle it. Not enough drug addiction funding, let's give it to the cops. Here in Dallas, we have a loose dog problem. Let's have the cops chase loose dogs. Schools fail, give it to the cops. 70% of African-American community is being raised by single women. Let's give it to the cops to solve as well. It's too much to ask. Policing was never meant to solve all of these problems. It's true. So I am very much for rethinking or reevaluating, restoring, that's the right word. I'm very much for restoring policing to what it used to be. But you can't just abolish it or defund it without replacing or without restoring the things that we've taken away from our society that have resulted in the need for policing to do as much, the police to do as much as they've been doing. Make sense? And you can't just replace it with a new bureaucracy. It's not gonna work. You need to replace it, you need to restore it with God, community, and family. But the left won't let that, right? Because God's not real. Who are you to say which culture is wrong? You can't blame lack of families for anything. Who are you to judge? So all they could think of, right? Have you heard one progressive politician, one, talk about getting back to church? Have you heard one talk about restoring community values and cultural norms? Have you heard one politician, anyone at Black Lives Matter, anyone talk about anything religious? Have you heard anyone at Black Lives Matter talk about community values? Have you heard anyone in Black Lives Matter talk about the family? No, all you do is like the video we played yesterday of them screaming at the mayor of Minneapolis. You hear him talking about abolishing the police. Okay, but then what? Oh, okay, yeah, we'll start the Office of Race and Equity. Okay, good. Problem solved. It's the only tool they have in their tool belt. It's all they know. Because they've removed all the other three things. They're not going to restore them. That same police chief I mentioned, I got to go because we got some guests here, but he also said, serve your communities. Don't be a part of the problem. We're hiring. Get off the protest line, put an application in, and we'll put you in your neighborhood, and we'll help you resolve the problems that you're protesting about. We said this like last week or so. A sane reaction to all this would be a police recruitment drive. Remember we played a video a week or so ago of a black officer who was talking about what happened to Floyd and how terrible and awful it was, and he said, that's why I joined the police force, to make sure that injustice never happens on my watch. He wanted to be a part of the solution, so he joined. And now I'm sure he's called a traitor, right? We've seen videos of black officers or guardsmen being yelled at by black protesters, being yelled the worst name in the book, right? Snitches get stitches. Instead, go. There should be you should be more. You shouldn't be abolishing the police. You should be joining the police. Meanwhile, in Chicago, this weekend, 92 people shot, 27 dead. 18 people were murdered in Chicago on Sunday. Black Lives Matter. Right? True story. Mike Slater. Coming up, we'll talk about the charges from 3rd to 2nd degree murder. What does that mean, really? Is there a chance this guy walks? We'll do that next. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusader. So the other day we were musing about what happens if this police officer walks from his 3rd degree murder charges. Well, now it was upgraded. The next day it was changed to 2nd degree murder. And I don't even know what all this stuff means. So Amy Swearer is here. She's the legal fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Amy, how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. How are you?
Wonderful. So let's talk 3rd degree. So what are and we'll do this quickly because it's not a thing anymore, but what did we need to know about this 3rd degree murder charge?
So the biggest thing you needed to know about 3rd degree is that it's the only murder charge for which he could not actually be convicted. And here's what I mean by that. So a lot of people read what 3rd degree murder was and thought, oh, well, that sounds like it fits. But 3rd degree murder, as defined by the state Supreme Court, only applies to things like driving under the influence and killing another motorist, where you have a general disregard for life generally. But if there's a specific disregard for a specific life, which is what you would think happened here, the officer directed all of his actions toward a specific person, that can't be 3rd degree murder in Minnesota. So from the very beginning, a lot of people who looked into this were questioning, why are we charging this man with something that legally speaking, he can't be convicted of? So it's actually a good thing that that's no longer the charge that we're looking at.
Very good. Okay, very good. Again, it's interesting why they would even do that in the first place then. Why would they even do 3rd degree? But wasn't there something there? I wish I had the text in front of me. I apologize. There was something about like wanton disregard. Right. For like there was like a deviance factor in there too, which, as you said, it seemed like it fit because he was so like callous and cold in it all, but you say it doesn't.
Right. So it's often considered, like depraved heart murder.
Depraved. That's
I think a lot of people looked at that and said, oh, well, his actions were depraved. But when you start getting into the legal technicalities and where the court has actually thrown this out, it looked very, very clear that this was never going to survive in court. So a lot of us were actually glad to see that one go by the wayside.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so 2nd degree murder. What is that in Minnesota?
So 2nd degree murder, there's 2 types of 2nd degree murder, and I think this is where a lot of people were getting confused. So the first part of 2nd degree murder can be intentional. And a lot of people looked at that and said, how do we prove intent here? But the good thing is there's a second version, and it's essentially called unintentional 2nd degree murder, also known as felony murder. So the legal theory goes something like this. If you're committing a felony and someone dies during that felony, regardless of whether or not you intended for that person to die, that's felony murder. That's unintentional 2nd degree murder. And so the argument is essentially that because Officer Chauvin used force that wasn't authorized under the law, he's actually just committing felony assault like the rest of us would be if we pinned a man to the ground to the point that he couldn't breathe. And because, of course, we know George Floyd died, at least in large part, as a result of these actions, that would be unintentional 2nd degree murder.
Can you give me another example of what hypothetically that might look like in a different scenario?
Unintentional 2nd degree murder?
Yeah.
So a lot of times it's used for something like if you go in to rob a store and you didn't, go in there intending for someone to die, but let's say, a concealed carry permit holder then tries to shoot you in the process and ends up killing another person. That death would be on you, effectively. Or in Minnesota, it would be like if you just wanted to punch someone and you never intended to kill them, but through a weird sequence of events, they end up dying anyway. that can also, at least in Minnesota, be unintentional second-degree murder.
Okay. So the intentional second-degree murder, that's the one that doesn't apply here, but that people were concerned about. Because It's like, oh, well, he didn't go like planning, whatever. So you're saying unintentional, okay. Do you think those charges could stick? Could he be found guilty of that?
Yeah, I think out of all of the murder charges that were available, this is the only one that is at least plausible. Now you have some sort of questions from policy standpoints, people being like, should we charge him with this? But it is at least a plausible charge that fits his actions that he can actually be convicted of.
I don't want to ask you to predict, but what are some reasons why he would be found not guilty?
It's always hard to say what a jury would do. There's always a possibility that a jury looks at this and says, that's just too severe of a charge, even if it fits. You could always have a court reinterpret the law later and say, actually, even though in the past we've said, that this qualifies as felony murder, it doesn't here. So there's always a lot of legal technicalities, a lot of depending on jury. But from what we can tell right now, this seems to be a very fitting charge, at least in terms of how Minnesota law works.
What role do you think the fentanyl could play from a defense lawyer's standpoint? How could he use the fentanyl or meth in his system to get the cop off?
So this is going to come down to causation because in terms of felony murder, your felony has to cause the death. There needs to be a causal link there. And so my guess is they'll look at that and say, actually, it wasn't his actions that really, it wasn't Officer Chauvin's actions that really caused this man's death. He was going to die anyway. I don't know exactly how much fentanyl he had in there, but it's plausible they could say, oh, he was overdosing anyway. Officer Chauvin's actions wouldn't have mattered. That's my guess as to where they will go. I don't know, based on the science. I went to law school, not medical school, so I don't know the science technicalities.
That sounds like a tough one. That sounds like a tough one. Okay, last question for you, Amy, and I hope we can talk again. Let me do this. The co-conspirators, or whatever they call them now, whatever. The other cops, they couldn't have been arrested on the third-degree murder charge, but they can be arrested on the second-degree murder charge. Is that right? And what do you think is going to happen to them?
So my understanding is they've been charged with aiding and abetting. So not directly with second-degree murder, but in Minnesota, as with a lot of other states, if you materially help someone commit that crime, you can also be held responsible. So they're not saying that these cops also actively participated, but that by their actions they enabled Officer Chauvin to do this, and therefore they are also liable for second-degree murder.
Oh, really? So it's a second-degree murder charge potentially.
Yeah, they are looking at also very serious charges. And it's going to be very fact specific. What did each officer do? What did they not do? We do know that in the Minneapolis police internal guidelines, there's actually a duty imposed on officers, an active duty to intervene when they see another officer using excessive force. So that will certainly play a role. But I think, too, you also have this counterbalance of two of these officers had been on the force, I think, a cumulative 5 days. Officer Chauvin was their training officer. There's sort of this power imbalance to say, well, at what point do we tell our training officer, you can't do that? And so, again, very fact specific. And I think that one is very, very much less clear cut in terms of how a jury might interpret all of this.
Okay, I really, really got to go. But when's this trial going to be, you think?
These are long and drawn out. This could be months. It will almost certainly be a long time.
Amy Swearer, legal fellow, Heritage Foundation. Amy, I hope you can be our go-to when it comes to this stuff. I appreciate your help.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Heritage Foundation. True story, Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. Really excited for our next guest. We talked years ago, right after this all happened. Do you remember the Sutherland Springs church shooting? It was in Texas. And there was a good guy with a gun across the street who heard the gunshots, ran across the street, fired back at the bad guy. The guy got in his truck, drove away, and ended up crashing, and the police got him. And Stephen Willeford saved many, many lives that day, and he's with us right now. Mr. Willeford, how are you, sir?
I'm doing excellent. Thank you for having me on.
And Stephen Willeford, I should say, from the Second Amendment Foundation. Stephen, I just blew through that story, right? Obviously. Was there anything noteworthy that I missed there or that we should mention before we talk about some bigger picture stuff?
Well, after he jumped in his vehicle and he fled, I flagged down a truck that was parked at the stop sign. And I told him that guy just shot up the Baptist church and we have to stop him. I jumped into a vehicle with a man I never met before in my life, and we chased him for over 11 miles.
Whoa, I didn't realize there was that much. Wow. Stephen, this is what I remember the most about the story. There was some miracle shot you made that no way could it have worked unless there was something else going on here, right? So what was that shot?
He had, well, I don't know if any one of them was any less than a miracle. He had on Class 3 body armor, which will stop rifles. And he had on a tactical bulletproof helmet. And I shot him in the left chest. I shot him in the abdomen. When he turned to his side, I was able to find the crease between the plates in his side. It has a front plate, a rear plate, and it Velcros across the side, and I was able to hit him in the side. I was able to hit him in the legs. He got in his vehicle, and he put 2 shots through the side window. And I couldn't see his head from the reflection of the glass, but I put my sights where I perceived his head to be. He had an abrasion across his forehead. He accelerated and took off down the road, and at about 150 yards, I ran out into the middle of the street, and he was accelerating away as fast as he could. I put the last shot through the back windshield. It penetrated the driver's side seat and hit him just right of the shoulder blade.
Yeah, so that's the one in particular. So 150 yards, like that's a ridiculous distance. Moving away, I'm sure turning or whatever, and like that impossible. Stephen, I'm obviously grateful you're there, and I'm glad you're here too, because I think about you from time to time, sir. Whenever, well, especially now, because a lot of people are buying guns, which is good, but I want people to know how to use them properly. And I want people to have the right mindset. I want people to have the right mindset too when they go into things like this. So first question for you, you could have done nothing, right? When you heard shots, you could have stayed in your house. You could have done nothing at all. Why did you do something?
Well, I've been asked before that, knowing what I know now and how it's changed my life. And if you ever do something like this, it will change your life. And they say, knowing what you know now and how it's changed your life, you could have stayed in your home. No one would know who you are. No one would know anything about you or anything. And no one would have blamed you for staying in your house. Would you do it now? And I said, that man that day changed my life. The difference is I chose how I changed my life. Because if I had done nothing, if I had stayed in my house, I'd still have to look at the man in the mirror every morning and say, you coward, how could you stay there while someone was shooting and killing people in your neighborhood? And I don't think I could live with that man.
Now, that's beautiful. Let me give the flip side here, Stephen. I'm curious your take, because I've seen some pictures of people with guns protecting their business, right? And I saw with these 3 Italian guys at a bakery in Cleveland in particular. And they were kind of in front of their business, and there was the mob in front of them, and they didn't use their gun. And I'm just thinking, oh man, that crowd could have overtaken them and taken their gun from them, and it could have been this big thing. So I just think, man, if you're gonna bring your gun to your business, you also need to know, like, you need to be willing that you may take somebody's life. You may kill someone today, and that will also change your life for the rest of your life, legally and many other ways as well. So there's a great responsibility as well. What do you think of that?
I think there is a great responsibility, and I would like people to understand that a gun can be a great deterrent, a visual deterrent. I would say here in Texas, we have a law that we can actually use deadly force to protect our property. I know in California you do not, but we do here in Texas. And I think it's a good law. I don't think that necessarily I would use deadly force to protect my property, but if I felt my life was in danger while protecting my property, that's a different story. And a big mob, yes, they could overtake someone with a gun, but who wants to be the first one shot? You know.
What's Once, how does taking someone's life, whether I don't think you did. The guy committed suicide afterwards, right? But how does taking someone's life, even totally justified as this was by every standard, I would say, how has that changed you? Not the fame or whatever you've gotten since then, but just the fact that you were a part of killing someone. That right? How does that change you?
Well, I thought I did change. I thought I did take his life that day. I don't think God designed us to take life. Or I know it's okay and it's justifiable in the Bible because there's many scriptures. I can't go into that. But I do believe that we weren't designed to do that necessarily. We may be called to do something like that, but that's not our design. And the grief when I thought I had taken a life, even a life that was so evil, I had to deal with that. How it's changed my life in so many ways. It's because the whole event was a spiritual battle between good and evil, and I felt that 100%. And I can't explain to you. It's deepened my faith because I believe I look back on my training and what I did and all the competition and shooting sports is like golf for me. You know, I go out and I relax with a day of shooting, and unless you've ever tried that, you'll never know what I'm talking about. It's a very relaxing sport. It's my golf. And Colonel Grossman said it best. He said a golf course is a perfectly willful misuse of a perfectly good rifle range is what he says. And what Grossman means by that is everything you do for a hobby should have a practical purpose in life, and golf doesn't have a purpose. And you hope that your training and the things that you do are never used, and you pray for that. But at any given moment, that can change. I never ever expected to use my gun for anything. In fact, on my gun safe, I have a sticker that says caution, fragile precision paper punching equipment inside.
I like it. Stephen, I want to talk some more, but I got one last question for you, sir. Hopefully we can do it again because I love your insight. We talked recently about the police officer who stood by when that other officer had his knee on George Floyd's neck, right? The one who was doing the crowd control. And I've been thinking a lot about that guy and how he didn't stop it or say anything, right, in the midst of that moment, it was 9 minutes. And I thought about his kids, if he has any, right? I'm making all this up. But I thought about his kids, and maybe they were disappointed with him. Because, it's the worst thing a parent can say to a kid is, I'm not mad at you, I'm disappointed. And maybe that's the worst thing a kid can say to a parent, too. And if I remember correctly with part of your story, wasn't your daughter involved somehow, or she was with you or something? And I guess my question is, what do your kids think about you and what you did? And how does that make you feel?
I am most honored at what my kids have said and done. First, my daughter that made me aware of the shooter. She is the one that came into my room and made me aware that the shooter was there. And why did she come into my room to make me aware? Because my daughter knew that I would do something. She knew her community was being attacked, and she knew that I would do something about it. And I didn't think about this till later, but if I had failed to do something, I don't think my daughter would love me any less. But as you say, I think she would have been a little bit disappointed at her father. And then I guess the next thing is I was in the just after it happened, I was in the middle of an interview with the NRA TV, and my son knocked at the door where I was doing the interview, and they said, it's okay, you know, and they cut the camera. And the woman from the NRA, he was telling me he was leaving, him and his wife were going home. And the lady from the NRA says, how does it feel to know that the country thinks your father is a hero? And my son gave me the best compliment he could have ever given me. He says, all it means to me is the rest of the world knows that my father is a hero. I've known that for years. As a father, I just, that just filled me with pride that my son thought of me that way before this happened.
Yeah, beautiful, perfect. Stephen, an honor to talk to you, sir. Stephen Willeford, the Second Amendment Foundation. Stephen, let's do it again. And I went all this time and I haven't complimented your hat yet. I apologize for that. I can't pull that off.
SAF.org. And if you want to bring me back to San Diego, I do training for churches and stuff. StephenWilleford.com.
Oh, wonderful. Yes, that's right. That was when you were in town last. Yeah, please, anyone listening now wants their church to be prepared for this, reach out for Stephen and have him come out and talk. Stephen, appreciate you, sir. We'll do it again.
Thank you.
SAF.org. True story. Mike Slater. Can't beat that. Spread the word.